So my first question is obviously about your son. Can you talk about Kort and what happened to him?
Yeah, so Kort, when he was 3.5 years old, we got a call from the school where he was at. He was in preschool, and the first question they asked me was, which hospital would you like him to go to? And my heart sunk a little bit, and I'm like, well, what's going on here? And Alicia was at work, and so we decided to get him to one of the hospitals there in Fargo, and he started, having seizures, and started having hundreds of seizures in a day, and had 4 different types of seizures, and it was a pretty tough time, but that's kind of when it all started.
Okay. So he was 3.5 years old. What was so is he the oldest, or you have other children, or?
At the time we had 2, and we had 1 older son.
Okay, so this was kind of a big shock to you to hear about this?
Yes. We knew nothing about epilepsy or seizures at that time. And when we got the call, he had been seizing at school, and they took him by ambulance, and we actually both left work immediately, raced there, and we beat the ambulance to the hospital. So we were anxiously there waiting for him to arrive. And when he did get there, he was completely alert, able to talk to us. And he had just that 1 seizure that day. And they did follow-up treatment then. I believe they did a CAT scan and some blood work just to rule out some things. And at that time, they told us that it was probably a fluke. He would maybe never have another seizure. So we left that day, took him out to lunch. We felt pretty comfortable that it was just kind of a fluke, because we had never noticed anything different in him that would have led us to believe that was going to happen in the first place. And so, we left that day feeling pretty comfortable that was it. And fast forward to just before Christmas, he started showing us 2 other types of seizures. One was the absence seizure. We would find him just staring off into space, and he wouldn't respond. So it wasn't like him just looking off. He would pause, and we would, kind of have to try to get his attention again. And then he also started having another type called myoclonics,
head drops,
where it was kind of like a shiver. He would kind of shake all down the front, and his hands would shake, but he would stop whatever sentence he was in the middle of, whatever motion he was in the middle of, have the seizure, and pick right back up where he left off. He may pause on a word, have that seizure, and move right along. And so that happened kind of in January. They started us on a med at that point, and things progressively got worse. He introduced another type of seizure called that one was called atonic, mm-hmm. and those were head drops, and those were very dramatic. He would
kind of the same thing though. He would have this seizure. Mm-hmm. I still remember I'm pitching baseballs to him, and he's a left-hander, and he'd just have this little head drop. He'd drop the bat and kind of go like this, and about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds later, he'd pick that bat up, slam it, and he'd be ready to go again, but it was pretty painful to watch. That was hard.
Yeah, so it progressed then to, he was having hundreds of those different types in a day. We didn't see the large tonic-clonic ones all that regularly. No. I think he had 4 or 5 of those total during his time. But we ended up seeing the neurologist at the hospital there several more times. We had several EEGs. They thought at the time that he was triggered by bright lights and flashing lights, which for our family was really difficult because we're in the coaching world and we spend our time in the arena. And I just pictured this lifetime of not being able to take him there because of all the bright lights, and that was hard at that time. But things continued to progress and got worse. And the specialist that we were seeing referred us to the Minnesota Epilepsy Group in the cities. And we actually saw a epilepsy specialist there that diagnosed him with a specific type of syndrome called DOSA syndrome. And it is very characterized by being more prevalent in boys. Very common for it to present itself between the age of 3 and 4, and characterized by the 4 types of seizures that he had. So they did an hour-long EEG there, which showed that he was having a seizure every 1 to 2 seconds. So ironically, our doctor that we were seeing was very surprised when he met Kort. He expected him to essentially be a vegetable. He did not think that he would be able to talk, walk, run. And honestly, other than the seizures happening, he presented himself as a very normal boy. We had a hard time keeping him from doing the things that they recommended he not climb on playground equipment, ride bikes. We had a hard time keeping him from doing those things because he was functioning very normal. But things then progressed where we did a 4-day hospital stay. They did some video EEG, and they kind of tried to piece things together to find a treatment plan for him because things were progressing to the point where he was slowing down. He was spending more time sitting next to us. He wasn't running around as much. His sleep was interrupted. He had them significantly at night falling asleep. And so we did the hospital stay, and we were pregnant with, at the time, our 3rd child. And they wanted us to go home and just kind of reassess and come back after we delivered our 3rd child. And we chose not to do that. We were ready to tackle this and find some answers. So we started at that day, that was on a Saturday. We came home on Sunday. We got Kort a giant cheeseburger and French fries. And the very next day, we started him on the medical form of the ketogenic diet. And that was tough. That is a very intense form of diet. I mean, it was extreme. But within 3 weeks of starting that, we started to notice things shifting.
Started to change, yep.
We started to look at each other and say, did you see a seizure today? And prior to that, we were recording in a notebook every time we saw something. So we were making hundreds of marks in a notebook throughout the day. And so we were very hopeful. The diet, at that point, he was on the diet as well as 4 meds.
4 meds, yeah.
And we were very hopeful to reduce the number of meds that he was on. And I don't know if you want to add anything about the diet.
Well, it took a lot of discipline. And obviously Alicia was a big part of that. And he had to have a tablespoon of either mayo, oil, butter, and then a 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream every time he had a meal, which was 3 times a day. And he couldn't have, each time we had a meal, he could have 5 carbs or 5.
So he had to have 1 to 2 ounces of protein, 5 grams of carbs,
carbohydrates,
and then he had to have 1 tablespoon of butter, mayo, or oil, plus a 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream, and that was all he could have in a meal. He could not, a lot of. Obviously, the ketogenic diet is very trendy, and people will talk about it and be like, "Oh, I'm on the keto diet." As you watch them maybe have a cheat day and have something. Kort wasn't allowed any cheat days. He needed to stay in full ketosis to be able to have success. So it was very extreme. We had to kind of eliminate some foods in the house that maybe were triggers for him. I will never forget that it was maybe 2 weeks into the diet when we'd gotten over the hump and the hard part of it.
He was in ketosis.
Yep, yeah. He was in ketosis, and I found him on our bed eating Cheez-Its. And that immediately, especially in his case, can take him right out of that ketosis. And so we had to be very diligent in staying on top of him. And honestly, we give a lot of credit to Kort. He was a 4-year-old child when he started that diet, and the first 2 weeks were rough.
Yeah.
But after that, I think he felt better because he never questioned us.
Well, he could feel things changing.
Mm-hmm.
He stopped having those seizures and was able to, act and do things that a normal kid could do. And that was, he hit the pause button on that for a little while. And obviously Kort deserves a lot of credit, but she's pretty humble. She put a lot of work in and deserves a lot of credit for him getting over the hump at the end of the day and preparing meals, every time he had to go somewhere. He had to take his own lunch every single day to school, and we had to have, the things that he needed to have in there. And, when we're going out traveling and on the road, she's packing stuff for him. And she deserves a lot more credit than she's going to take. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, it's Kort too, and his buddies are eating lollipops and sorry, buddy, you can't have that. Yeah. And, we're eating Thanksgiving dinner and he's there eating a hot dog, dipping it in mayonnaise. And that's a hard deal for your kid to watch your kid go through. And, but the bright side was, he wasn't having seizures. And we were very concerned cognitively that would start to affect him if he continued to have those seizures. So to be able to get it under control fairly quickly.
Yeah, I do feel like
important.
That was a benefit for us. I feel like we were lucky. We had a close friend that worked at the hospital that we were treating Kort at originally. And, I feel like he directed us to the right people. And I feel like we saw a doctor there that very quickly said, Kort is outside my scope. I need you to go see somebody that can deal with this more than I can. And he was very honest about it, and he very quickly referred us to somewhere else. And I do feel like to this day that's why we gained some control very quickly, is because we were treated very quickly. I feel like all the right things happened at the right time for Kort to get better.
It was pretty ironic, and we talk about the coaching world being a small world.
Yeah.
And Paul Seizure, who's a head coach at North Dakota, and we're actually related in some ways, which is kind of goofy. But I was telling, we had been visiting. He was the head coach at Black Hills State at the time, and we were just visiting because he coached me when I was in college at Wayne State. He was an assistant coach there, and so we've been in contact and been friends ever since. And he was asking, hey, how's our family doing? And ironically, I go, well, we're actually going through some tough times. And I told him the story about Kort. And so happens he had a nephew that dealt with the exact same thing.
Like years before.
Years before. Mm-hmm. And he had talked about how he had tried the ketogenic diet to help him because the meds weren't working. And we're like, and I just, my heart just dropped. I'm like, well, the meds aren't working for Kort either. Mm-hmm. And so what is this thing? And he got me in contact with his brother and his wife and Alicia, really did a ton of research on it. And she's like, and she's sitting here 7 months pregnant. And she goes, we're doing it. We're trying it. And you do anything for your kids. Yeah. I understand that, but it's just like things happen for a reason, and, Paul calling and telling me about his brother, and then it's just crazy how things happen.
Yeah.
And it just, to be able to get it under control so fast was certainly pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So when Kort was having these seizures, what was going through your minds as like just trying to help him any way you can?
Well, you feel helpless. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be honest with you, you're not really, you can't really do anything about it. We're seeing doctors, you're trying to get it under control, and he's sitting here at the, kitchen table, and, he's eating cereal or whatever, and he has his head drop, and then milk spills and all that stuff, and you're just sitting there. It's like you get emotional thinking about it because you can't really do anything about it.
And it made him sad.
He was embarrassed, and so that's how I felt. I just felt helpless, I guess.
Yeah, it felt very foreign because I didn't know anybody in my lifetime that I witnessed have seizures. I have an aunt that had some, but I'd never witnessed, honestly, a seizure until Kort had his first one at home. And I am thankful to this day that his very first one happened at school. I don't know how I would have reacted if I had been there for the first one. So when it did happen the second time at home, I panicked, but I didn't panic in the sense of like,
you were helpless. Yeah.
Yes.
You
like I knew what to
it.
do. I knew what the next step was. And so I'm grateful for that. And Kort, like we talk about him a lot, that he beats to his own drum, and and even during that time, he made it easy when it was really hard, I guess. He made a really, really difficult situation a lot easier than it could have been. Everything we asked him to do, he did. His first EEG, he was 3 years old, and they scratch your head and they put these prongs on, and they told us several times during that first EEG that how proud they were of him for he just sat there. He didn't cry. And he's just tough. And to this day, I feel like he is mentally tough because of what he's been through. We chose during that time that we didn't want it to define Kort. And so, he played soccer, he went to birthday parties, and we chose not to make a big deal out of that for Kort, that there was snacks that the team brought. And we always just brought our own. We don't want Kort to be the kid that has epilepsy, the kid that has seizures. We just want Kort to be a kid. So we kind of took a lot of that on ourselves and tried to prevent it from defining who Kort was. And a lot of that, like Eric said, was having to be prepared and having things ready. And
so he is 11 now, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And he's been on this keto diet since he was 4 years old?
So we're fortunate. He was able to go off the diet in May of 22. Yep. So he was on it for 6 years. When he first started on it, when we left the hospital, he was on 3 meds, and we started the diet. After, I don't remember the time frame, but he was able to wean off of 1 med. So he was down to 2 meds and the diet. And then probably in a year's time, each time we would go back and his EEG was still fairly clear, we would take out another med. Yep. Till we got down to the last year, he was just on
the 1 med.
The 1 med and the diet.
Yep.
And then we took out... Did we take out the diet first or the med first? We took out the diet first.
Yeah.
And then he went for another year on 1 med. And we just took that out last year.
Yeah.
So he is currently not on any medication or any
diet restrictions.
That's incredible. Being that young and being on just that strict of a diet, and goodness. I mean, I guess, did he have a seizure through that whole time, or did he...
He did. So we noticed, we started to notice, and we had a notebook that we kept. So we knew that at 3 weeks, he stopped having the seizures. But it was it 3 months?
About 3 months,
About
yeah.
3 months. He had what they call a breakthrough seizure. And it was in the evening, and he had just gone to bed. And thankfully at the time, our 2 boys shared a room. Eric was here, actually, and I was in Fargo with the kids by myself. We'd had our new baby, so she was a couple weeks old. And he had a seizure that evening, a tonic-clonic one. And our oldest son came in to tell me that he was having one. But as far as we know, and everything we've recorded, that's the last seizure he's ever had. So that would have been June of 2016.
Yep.
So we know that we have not seen any seizures when we've been with him, and he's had a clear EEG for the last 2 years, I believe. Yeah. He still had some activity on his EEGs initially, but the last
Nothing
2
was
years,
visual.
Yes, the last 2 years it's been completely clear.
Wow. So he's been clear, and he does sports. He does every activities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's been able to, really there was never a stoppage at the end of the day. He was
Yeah.
able to continue to do things. He had to help wear a helmet a few different
Yeah,
times.
he
at
did have to wear
different places.
It's like a soft helmet for
Yeah.
that, especially when he was having head drops.
Yeah.
Just to protect him.
But other than that, he's been able to be a normal kid. And, you know, it's really scary still. You know, you think
Yeah.
about it, like, when is it going to happen again? And especially with puberty coming up, that can affect, you know, some neurological stuff. So you're always just in the back of your mind, you're always a little cautious, but we also are very, very thankful.
Yeah. Yeah, we still worry, but we worry differently now.
Yeah.
And you brought it up earlier that, you know, that these seizures kind of, you don't want Kort to be defined as seizures. How has Kort taken this? How has he grown up as a person, and, you know, kind of just grown with these seizures, and now that he's free, you know, how has that defined him?
I think he's sensitive. You know, I notice it in, he loves sports, loves athletics. We are an athletic family. So I notice it mostly in sports. When a teammate gets hurt, whether it's his team, the opposing team, he almost, like, it makes me want to cry, but he's like there, like.
He doesn't want anybody to hurt. You know, when somebody else is hurting, he's hurting. He doesn't want anybody else to go through pain or anything like that. He knows what that's all about. He knows that's hard. And so I kind of agree with you, Alicia. I think he's really cares about people.
Yeah, he has. People tell us all the time that he gives the best hugs, and he does, and I believe it's because he is sensitive to that, and he really cares about people, because he realizes during that stretch how many people cared about him. A lot of people really looked after us and helped us out during that time, and so I think he understood that, even though he was young. I think he understands that that's how you get through life, is helping people and doing the right thing, and I think he sees that.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's defined who he is today, and he's pretty gritty. He is a tough kid, and I think it's because of that. He went through things that most kids his age aren't going through. Most kids don't go to a birthday party and take their half cup of heavy whipping cream to drink, but he did it, and he never complained.
Yeah.
He really never complained. And
Still
to
doesn't.
this day, we still find it's kind of funny. We laugh about it now. We find foods that he hasn't tried. It was probably 6 months ago. He was like, "Could I try one of those?" And I'm like, "You've never had a vanilla wafer?" But he'd never had a vanilla wafer because that was a big no-no. That was.
Yeah.
He didn't have soda, I think, until, I shouldn't say that. He could have soda because he could have caffeine-free diet soda while he was on the diet. But I don't know to this day right now if he's even had a caffeine drink, because that can be a triggering thing for seizures. And so there are still things that we're finding now that he's never had, which is just crazy.
Awesome. Thank you for telling that story. My final question I kind of just have for you guys is, you know, what have you taken away from this experience? You know, what do you want to tell people out there I guess maybe someone is going through this, you know, what are some things that you've learned through all this?
I think for me, it's, you know, everybody goes through some hard times, and how you approach it can mean a lot. And Kort's attitude was amazing, and that doesn't mean it's always going to work out the way it worked out for Kort, right? That doesn't mean that, but it sure makes going through that process a lot easier. And then the other thing is, you don't have to go through it alone. You know, there's, like Alicia said this many times, the support that we had was incredible, and we're just very, very thankful for the people that were around us and our families for that support. And that's, I guess, what I think is important to take away from it.
Yeah, I would say for families that are maybe starting that stage, in the middle of that stage, I think what I've learned through all of this is epilepsy is not the same for any one person. What Kort had, his types of seizures, they're different than what the next person has. And I think that's the scary and hard part about epilepsy is there isn't one treatment plan that helps every person out there. What worked for Kort, someone else can present the exact same way, go down the same path of meds and the diet and not have the success that Kort had. And so that's why epilepsy research and all that is so important, because they don't know. It is a neurological mystery, really. I mean, everybody's EEGs present differently, and Kort's was very extreme, and look where we are today. So, I mean, that's probably what I've learned the most is, and so when a lot of people will come to us and ask, you know, like, what did you do for Kort? And I usually preface it with, this worked for us, but you have to be diligent yourself and pushing forward and finding what works for you, because it's not the same for every child out there. And I shouldn't say child, because adults as well, but for us it hits home with kids.